Welcome to Fleet Auto News Podcast. I'm Caroline Falls, and today I'm speaking with Lina Goodman, CEO of Australia's Tyre Stewardship. We're going to talk about tyre design and issues around end-of-life tyres. TSA has a program to partner with organisations for thoughtful disposal of old tyres. It's called the Circular Economy Collaborator, and we'll hear more about that. This topic fits with the FAN podcast theme for 2022 to focus on the circular economy and all things to do with sustainability. I also want to thank our sponsor, Sofico Services, and we'll hear a message from them during the show. Let's get into it. I have Lina on the line. Welcome, Lina.
Thank you, Carolyn. I'm so pleased to be here.
Yes, it was good that we finally got to get our Skype coordinated. But let's talk about tyres. I was wondering, first off, how many tyres a year do Australian cars and trucks burn through each year, and how many of those might end up in landfill?
Thanks, Carolyn. And, as a tyre recycling focus, I really hate the word burn and tyres in the one sentence. But each year we have approximately 23 million passenger and motorbike tyres that reach end of life. And truck tyres, that's about 19 million truck tyres that reach end of life. So between passenger, motorbike and truck, it's about 330,000 tonnes of tyres that reach end of life each year here in Australia. But on a positive note, particularly in these three segments, we do see that about 90% of these are recovered and processed, ready for the next stage of recycling and use.
Wow, that's fantastic. I did not expect to hear such a strong figure there. But still, tyres, at the end of life are a significant problem if they're not disposed of thoughtfully. And I was astonished to hear somewhere recently that some 10% of microplastics in the ocean are attributed to tyres. Do you have a comment on that? Do you know how that even happens?
Thanks, Carolyn. I think first, for Tyre Stewardship Australia, we really do focus on finding value-added markets for tyres once they reach end of life. And what you're referring to here is the impact that tyres have whilst in use on a vehicle. And you're correct in that we do know a passenger tyre weighs approximately about 9 kilos when it's new, but when it reaches end of life, it's about 8 kilos. So that 1 kilo does need to go somewhere. And studies have certainly shown that tyres, the chemicals released from tyres can be harmful. But there are several particularly pieces of advice I'd like to give. Firstly, it's around vehicle owners. You should probably consider a tyre care plan, checking air, tread, and rotating tyres regularly certainly does avoid unnecessary decay of the tyres, which can impact the environment and the vehicle safety. It also ensures the tyres reach the maximum life intended. But also consider buying tyres that are clearly manufactured to a regulatory standard. We know that the EU and the US have got some great standards in place, and all good tyres are manufactured to those standards. Because if we consider a bargain tyre, sometimes a bargain tyre is going to do more damage to our environment, possibly because they reach end of life faster and lose a lot more of this harmful chemical much faster than anyone else. So they're probably some of my handy tips whilst we start trying to increase the sustainable aspect of our tyres.
Yeah, amazing. So different materials used by different manufacturers have different outcomes. Is the takeaway. Yeah. In my first job as a reporter, one of the stories I vividly recall doing was about the problem of disposing of tyres. And back then, a group had formed a reef in the ocean from old tyres, and they had footage of how quickly corals and fish had populated it. But is it something that would be acceptable now? I guess there might be sort of leaching of chemicals and plastics from old tyres, but what do you think?
Yeah, thanks, Carolyn. I certainly agree. I think this wouldn't be acceptable today. I can't begin to imagine what the long-term degradation impact of a tyre in the ocean would be. And if it loosens from whatever it's contained, they bop around in our oceans for a very long time. I really shudder at the thought of that. But thankfully, we are seeing some great examples where tyres are upcycled, recycled and reused, for more sustainable outcomes, which is really what we want to see. Some of these examples, we see crumb rubber that's taken from used tyres and used in roads, where actually it increases the durability, so there will be less damage to the road surface over a normal lifetime. Used tyres are also included in pavements. It creates permeability, so allowing better management of our stormwater runoff to improve nearby trees and parklands, for example, which is a great idea for local councils. It's even used in some golf course where end-of-life tyres transformed into hard wearing, durable, porous surfaces, and we've seen some examples of that in some regional locations in Australia. And for all the avid gym goers, if they're doing their workout on tiles, they're probably doing their workout on tyres made from used tyres, which really do provide a lot of support from the gym sector across the country. So these are just an example of a few ideas, and we're seeing them in agriculture, matting under cows. We see it involved in concrete, and it provides a more barrier in the concrete when they're building, like concrete barriers on freeways or in buildings. So there's lots of applications. What TSA does is it provides funding to organisations who have opportunities where tyre-derived material can go. And to date, we've committed $8 million to a whole range of different projects to see more tyre-derived material used in some great projects like the ones I've just mentioned.
Oh, thanks for bringing up, some of the goals of and objectives of TSA, because I was curious about Tyre Stewardship Australia. Like, when was it formed? Why was it formed? What are the organisation's guiding goals? Like, how are you funded?
Yeah, well, we were formed in 2013, and really we were formed by the opportunity to find new markets for tyre-derived materials. So some of the country's, I guess, biggest tyre importers, they contribute to our scheme. You can look them up on our website. There's about 12 or 13 of them that are contributing a levy, and that levy is the equivalent of 25 cents per passenger tyre, and it's paid on the sale of a tyre, and we use those funds to administer the scheme. The scheme objectives are really simple, and they're set by the ACCC. Our scheme is really to create new markets for end-of-life tyres. So as I mentioned, to date, we've committed $8 million to projects. The aim is really to find local uses for the tyres that become our waste. The second objective is we really want to avoid the mismanagement of end-of-life tyres. We've all seen some scary images of tyre stockpiles. We want to avoid that, and we do that through an accreditation process. So good quality retailers, good quality recyclers and collectors, they'll become accredited with Tyre Stewardship Australia, and we encourage organisations to only work with accredited entities because we know that they're not likely to take tyres and dump them on land around the country or abandon them in warehouses. Our final objectives is around increasing the public awareness of the sustainable disposal of end-of-life tyres. What's interesting is that our scheme, it's a voluntary scheme. It means that organisations that contribute the levy, they do so voluntarily. There's no regulatory requirement for them to participate in the scheme. And what's exciting is that as of January this year, we're starting to see the off-the-road sector contribute to the scheme. And you might remember, Carolyn, I mentioned that in passenger, truck and motorcycles, we have a 90% recovery rate. Unfortunately, in the off-the-road sector, it's only a 15% recovery rate. So there's a lot more work we need to do in that space to increase sustainability of end-of-life tyres.
So when you say off the road, you're talking about agricultural or mining enterprises, are you?
100%. It's mining, agriculture, construction, aviation.
Okay. And the other thing, like if TSA, it's not even 10 years old, what I was really curious, like, how did it even come about? Like, who came up with the idea? Like, why did it
Yeah.
come about?
Sure. So we were born out of an industry association called the Australian Tyre Industry Council, ATIC, which is made up of members of tyre manufacturers and importers. And they recognise that there's a problem with creating markets in Australia for end-of-life tyres. And product stewardship, which is what we are, is not unusual. And many countries globally have had product stewardship schemes for a very long time, and they've been very successful. So TSA, the Australian version, is quite new. A lot of the tyre manufacturers were well understood the benefits of a product stewardship scheme. So there were some founding members that got together and really spearheaded the arrangement of TSA, which is where we're at today. And that included organisations such as Goodyear, Kumho, Michelin, Pirelli, Yokohama, Continental really got involved and started contributing at the very beginning. But now, of course, we've got Bridgestone, Toyo, Tyre Connect and a few others who contribute to the scheme as well.
We'll be back after a short break for a word from our sponsor, Sofico Services.
Sofico is a world-leading provider of enterprise software for the automotive leasing, finance, and mobility industry. For more than 30 years, international leasing companies and OEMs count on Sofico's expertise and technology to help them transform innovative product concepts into streamlined business processes and engaging customer experiences. With more than 370 experts, 8 offices on 4 continents, and an annual growth averaging 15%, Sofico is perfectly positioned to help its customers succeed in a rapidly changing market where electrification, shared fleets, and multimodal mobility challenge us and our customers to play a pioneering role. Continuous investment in people, innovation, and leading-edge technology is the basis for continued growth and success.
Yeah, it's good to understand sort of where you've come from. Now, I was talking with your colleague, Tolga Hussein, ahead of this interview, and he said that you've been working with fleets recently, and fleets are our audience. So can you tell us what you've been doing in that regard?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I'm very excited in my conversations with fleet organisations. They are really integral to the scheme and TSA, and they themselves are taking their professional responsibility to sustainability seriously, and it's wonderful to see. And they're doing that by engaging with TSA, becoming accredited themselves. Now, it's worth noting that becoming accredited with TSA doesn't actually cost the organisation anything. It's about a commitment that showcases a pathway to always focusing on the sustainable outcomes of end-of-life tyres. And we do that in a few ways. So fleet organisations will commit to working only with accredited tyre retailers for the purchasing or the exchange of tyres. And by doing so, they're actually supporting the sustainable disposal of those tyres, because we're all working in this ecosystem of making sure we care about the tyres when they reach end of life. Now, if fleet organisations have retailers or other workshops that are not accredited, well, we can work with them on becoming accredited. And that's the beauty of this kind of conversation that we're having with fleet organisations. But also, fleet organisations have a strong procurement process, and they can send a strong signal to the market by having consideration of their brand choice. So not all brands are contributing to the scheme. And purchasing the brands that do means we keep this ecosystem where funds are being utilised to support new markets for tyre-derived material once they reach end of life. So there are a few easy steps, but they certainly go a long way to creating, like I said, this ecosystem where we're all working towards supporting better outcomes for tyres once they reach end of life.
Okay, so basically the accreditation in a way is similar to seeing a fleet implement a specific policy for procurement of tyres and for end-of-life tyres, or
spot on.
Is that something that you want to see them have these specific policies or accreditation?
Spot on. And I think the engagement with fleet organisations, and if they want to get on board, they can do so through our website and just email us directly. Again, it doesn't cost them anything because this is not about a fee. This is actually about us all working together. And by becoming accredited, is actually the policy and roadmap to greater outcomes. So as I said before, it's getting their own workshops or those that they work with using TSA accredited entities. It's the first step to keeping all organisations responsible. So pretty simple, but very strong in the outcome that it has. And I think it's fair to say, Carolyn, like we've been going for some time, and fleet organisations were a lost conversation for us. So I really welcome this opportunity today because my experience is that fleet organisations send a really strong message to the market. They're using the retailers that care and choosing the brands that contribute. They can already make a big impact.
Definitely. Now let's just go back a little bit in time and maybe talk about the history of tyre disposal in Australia and how it's changed, and maybe you've got some milestones that you've even ticked off in the time as TSA.
Well, there's been some interesting changes over the time, Carolyn. I think many of your listeners would know that the federal government implemented a ban on whole and bale tyres, and this came into effect December 1, 2021. This policy would mean that organisations who used to bale tyres prior to exporting would no longer be able to do so, and tyres would actually need to be processed into a shred before it was eligible for an export licence. But there's much more impacting the market at the moment than just the export policies and licence. We're seeing some real changes in supply chain, shipping issues, container availability. This means that in the short term, we're probably going to go backwards a little bit in terms of recovery rates because our usual markets working with international organisations to use tyre-derived material as a fuel, for example, in the cement kiln industry, are not having access to our material because we can't get it to them. So we're really going to have to ramp up our local consumption of tyre-derived material. But we've seen some fantastic opportunities. You know, the roads sectors nationwide have really increased their consumption of crumb. TSA has implemented a foreign end market verification program, and this is really to support that the material which does go overseas, we want to make sure it's not causing environmental and social harm in the markets that they're landing in, so that all those that work with us can feel comfortable that material being exported is not being dumped in another country to handle. So we really want to make sure that it's being used for its intended value. But there's a whole range of different processes in place at the moment. We're seeing the sector really pivot, more organisations taking and shredding material. And what's exciting is that I think we'll start seeing Australia use tyres as a fuel source in its own cement kilns, which we've not seen in the past, and that'll be a real game changer for us.
Do you think this is all very widely known out there in the general community, let alone the fleet community?
That's a tough one, isn't it? You know, I think consumers, and rightly so, rely on their tyre retailer to manage their tyres sustainably. but I think the work that's being done by TSA and the sector in general is probably not really widely known. It's not widely distributed or informed. Consumers aren't really that informed, although it's a really tough kind of segment to break into. I guess the benefit is that if we can work with only those retailers that care, and at the moment TSA has 1,700 retailers that are accredited, we really need to lift their sustainable profile. As consumers do become a lot more informed, they'll start making the right choices. Until the disposal outlet disappears, so when retailers stop taking consumers' tyres, I think that's when the focal point for tyre disposal will actually increase, because there's nowhere to take it.
Another program I was interested in that I think you've launched only recently is called the Circular Economy Collaborator. What's that program about? Who's it aimed at? Who's participating?
We're really excited about this program, and it really takes the essence of what is circular economy, and it's about taking end-of-life tyres as a feedstock for new value-added products. We want to see, the boosting of new industries and creating new jobs that didn't exist in industries before. So this was really this kind of circular economy piece, and it's really what TSA does by creating new markets. So the program is largely aimed at, manufacturers who are creating new finished products from used tyres. I mentioned one earlier around gym flooring. Well, that's a local manufacturer in Australia taking used tyres, creating gym flooring and selling it locally. So we want to really highlight those organisations that are using tyre-derived material. Also, organisations like councils who are the consumers of tyre-derived material in their roads, in their pavements, within their buildings, in their sporting fields and golf courses. And lastly, it's aimed at research organisations who have really done a fantastic job at delivering the methodology of using the tyre-derived material in the Australian market. We've seen some really insightful research that's come out of our institutions here in Australia that's really sought after overseas about the benefits of tyre-derived material in a whole heap of new markets. Green steel is the first one that comes to mind, an organisation there in the Hunter Valley of New South Wales, Molycop, that's using tyre-derived material as part of steel production. So this is where that circular economy collaborator is really aimed at.
Well, the circular economy, one of the key principles are to reuse, remanufacture and recycle materials. And to do that really successfully, products need to be designed with those 3 R's in mind. So, from all the outcomes that you're saying, people are finding uses for end-of-life tyres, is there any feedback going back up to the design end? Are they redesigning tyres to be eminently more reusable at their end of life?
Yeah, and you're spot on. I mean, circular economy truly starts at the design phase, and there are several aspects to this. The tyres are manufactured out of rubber, which is a highly valuable resource. Taking the tyres and shredding it and creating it into a product is actually the easy part. The hard part is changing the mindset of the consumers of that material to showcase that tyre-derived material is actually beneficial in its use. So, for example, beneficial in the manufacturing of roads or within cement kilns, which is very much used globally, but not so much here in Australia. So the rubber is really valuable. But I guess a couple of points to note is we talked previously around tyres that are manufactured to a regulatory code, whether that's the EU code or the US code. Well, these tyres are built to last. They're not built to reach their end of life prematurely. So it's something we really want to focus on from a design perspective, buy the ones that are manufactured to a particular code, because we know that they're built to last. They're not going to reach end of life faster. Lastly, many of the large manufacturers have actually themselves made strong commitments to tyre sustainability. You know, we've seen public statements around 100% of tyres sustainable by 2050. We've also seen publicly the production concepts of tyres where there's a greater consumption of recycled carbon black right through to food waste. You know, there's talk about potato peeling in tyres. So I think from a manufacturer's perspective, they've heard the consumer and community sentiment loud and clear, and I think they're investing to reach their sustainable targets, which is exciting. But I think what we need to do here in Australia is really invest in ramping up those markets that can quite easily use tyre-derived material as a source in their own production. I hope that answers the question, but I think tyres are designed in a way that they can be reused. We just need to change the end market so that consumers know that the consumption of tyres is actually a good thing and it's not going to cause environmental and social harm.
Now I'm going to finish our interview with another terrible pun on tyres. So what are some tyre goals you want to kick?
Well, you know, COVID, labour shortage and supply chain issues have put us back a few years. But as the market recovers, I think the perfect scenario and one goal in which we're really aspiring to is for us to consume all the used tyres that we generate here in Australia into new products. You know, we want to be the custodians of our own tyre waste is probably the biggest and really single point goal to kick. That journey though, Carolyn, it's going to be a long one. It's going to be rough. And we may actually go backwards before we can take some leaps forward. But I think the horizon is looking positive.
And actually, while we've been having this conversation, I recall that as a teenager, I had a pair of sandals that had tyre treads on the sole. So
absolutely,
you can always go there. Anyway, thanks for your time today, Lina. It's been so illuminating. I've found it fascinating, and I hope our listeners enjoyed it and share it with other fleets and drivers.
Thanks, Carolyn. Thank you very much.
You've been listening to Fleet Auto News podcast. It was edited and produced by Isabella Fiorentino. Thank you again to our new sponsor, Sofico Services. It's great to have you on board. The original theme music for this podcast was created by Isabella Fiorentino. You can follow us on Spotify. Just search for Fleet Auto News. We're also on Instagram, Facebook and YouTube. Our website is fleetautonews.com, where you can get all our stories, videos and podcasts. Until next time, drive safely and take care. Thank you.